The World Affairs Council of Greater Reading is the leading educational organization promoting understanding and enlightenment on global issues. Here we are on a Thursday morning, a little bit of a deviation from our normal time here at 10 a.m. this morning, but we're going to have a great presentation, just like we've been bringing all along. I will remind everyone we're streaming to Facebook. We're recording this. We'll post the recording up to YouTube later on, but we are live right now with our members in Zoom. We'll have some people watching on Facebook as we go here. Feel free to start entering your questions as they occur to you. We will have live Q&A with our presenter at the end of the presentation. If you are, it's not our lunchtime event, but I'll remind everybody, keep yourselves muted. If you're going to be eating on camera, just go ahead and turn your camera off. Otherwise, let's have a great presentation. I'm going to turn it over to our World Affairs Council President for a couple introductory announcements and comments. Dr. Saul Lausch, take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mike. I just have a statement to read here in recognition of Veterans Day, which we again celebrated, if that's the right way of saying it, this past Wednesday, November 11, in the context of today's presentation. Veterans Day was set aside, as we do each year, somewhat in parallel with Memorial Day, to remember the sacrifices of our men and women in uniform, the sacrifices they've given in defense of our country. In Canada, incidentally, the day is called Remembrance Day. Veterans Day, then known as Armistice Day, was set aside in 1919 in recognition of the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918 that signaled the end of World War I, the war to end all wars, as so then it was thought. That, of course, did not happen. And 20 years later, the world was again at war, with the United States forced into the conflict with the attack on Pearl Harbor, Sunday, December 7, 1941. In the aftermath of that war, nations around the world, we set aside into action institutions to make certain that still another world war would not happen. One, the United Nations, was established formally in October 1945 as a successor to the failed League of Nations. The second was NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, about which we will be hearing today. Established by treaty April 4, 1949, by member nations, in part as a defensive pact to thwart Soviet aggression. We have had armed conflict since then, when American men and women have again been called upon in defense of our nation, most notably the Korean and Vietnam conflicts. While the merit and nature of these conflicts can be open to debate, no one can deny the sacrifices men and women have given in the engagement, sacrifices that continue today. Thank you. And now I believe our program chair, Dave Bean, is going to be introducing our speaker.
Thank you, Saul. Welcome everyone to what is part two of our presentations on NATO. You'll recall that Ron Graneri addressed us last month on really NATO from a stateside perspective here in the United States. And we wanted to also find a speaker who could, talk to us about NATO from the continent's perspective. And today we are pleased to have with us Michal Baranowski, who is the director of the Warsaw office of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. So hence the time difference. Michal is in Warsaw, which is 6 or 7 hours ahead of us. We are very pleased that he's able to join us today to provide somewhat of a different perspective on an issue that's been front and center in American politics now for several years as we reevaluate our relationship with NATO. As I said, Michal is the director of the GMF's Warsaw office, where he provides overall strategic direction and leadership for the organization's work in Poland, the Baltic States, and the Visegrad countries, Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. He writes and speaks extensively on NATO, transatlantic relations, and US foreign policy, and is frequently quoted in news outlets such as the Associated Press, Financial Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Die Welt, Reuters, Washington Post, and Foreign Affairs. He publishes in Polish, American, and European media and policy journals. He is a member of the Polish-German Reflection Group established by presidents of Poland and Germany. He holds a Master's of European Public Affairs degree from Maastricht University and has studied at Mercer University in the United States and the University of Oxford. So without any further ado, welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. It's really fantastic to be with you all. And David, thank you so much for very kind introduction. It's great to be in the US, even if it's only virtually. The Atlantic is a little bit wider these days because of the pandemic. So yeah, welcome from Warsaw. Welcome from the far east flank of the alliance of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I'm happy to provide a little bit of a perspective from here, and I hope this could be a good beginning of a conversation with you and with other folks joining on Facebook and Zoom. Let me just give you one sort of explanation of my approach, because the name of our organization is sometimes a little bit confusing. The name is here because of historical reasons, but we are German Marshall Fund of the United States. We are based in Washington, D.C. actually. So not that far from where you are, but we are a transatlantic organization. So we have 7 European offices, the Warsaw being along with Bucharest and Ankara further to the east. And as David mentioned, security and defense is a big part of our work. I have a little presentation as well, but I hope to speak more and have more of a conversation. But I have a little PowerPoint that perhaps can illustrate some of the points that we agreed will be discussed today. So I'm going to do my best now to share it. So just bear with me. Share screen and PowerPoint. There we go. Is it working roughly? Can you see
Yes.
that? Okay, great. Let's see if I press F5. It's okay. Awesome, great. So you see Macron and Merkel, right? Okay, excellent. And President Trump, of course. All right. So NATO from European perspective. I was asked to provide a little bit of a historical perspective and where we are. I'm not going to go way back when, because really especially from perspective of the eastern flank, the alliance has gone through a tremendous transformation, especially since 2014, especially since the annexation of Crimea by Russia, and since the war in eastern Ukraine, in a positive, very positive way. So let me start with that. Where we are at NATO in this context, because the last 4 years has really been about the transformation of the alliance and going back to its original role in providing defense and deterrence to the whole alliance. And because of the aggressive revanchist policies of Russian Federation, have actually starting before 2014. Of course, we remember here the war in Georgia in 2008, but then really conclusion by annexing Crimea and the war in Ukraine spurred the alliance to be back as a both political and military force in Europe. So in 2016, we have seen new elements and actual first presence, a full military presence of NATO's forces on the eastern flank in Baltic States, in Poland, and later on also in Romania, through something called enhanced forward presence, where various nations lead brigade size deployments. In Poland, it's US, as you will see in a second. But this was really a first concrete, real presence that we have seen since joining the alliance in 1999. So in Warsaw, we see enhanced forward presence. We see a declaration that cyber is a new domain and a recommitment to 2% of spending for each of the allies. And the little graph to the right shows you who is doing well, who is above, and how many countries are below the 2% spending. It's getting better. And in fact, the last 4 years have seen an increase in spending. We are not there yet. I mean, Poland is, the Baltic States are, US is, of course, but it's also with a much, it includes all of US spending globally, Greece and UK, while quite a few others are not there yet. Then in the 2018, there was a Brussels summit that really re-emphasized the debate over burden sharing, but started moving the way the NATO is commanded, the command and control function of the alliance, to really get more serious and better prepared for the challenges that we are seeing in the east and the south of the alliance. This is the map of how we, I wanted to give you an overview where we are exactly on the northeastern flank, sort of my neighborhood. This is the enhanced forward presence that I mentioned. You will see that there are 4 framework nations, 4 leading nations: US, Germany, Canada, and UK. US in Poland, the other ones are in the Baltic States, but they command multinational brigade size forces that are there ready to fight. They are not very large, but they are more than just symbolic gesture. But of course, the eastern flank is not the only level, not the only presence of US in Europe. We have, in fact, the eastern flank is a relatively new component and a new development. The biggest presence of US is still in Germany, as you can see, UK, Spain, Italy, and Turkey, actually Italy being second one. Here is where actually quite a bit of debate lately, as you probably have noticed, is about US deployments in Germany. President Trump announced pulling 9,500 troops from Germany, relocating some of the commands to Belgium and Italy, and bringing some of these troops back to US and redeploying some of the other ones in the eastern flank and perhaps also to the Asian theater. There is frankly quite a high hope that Biden's administration will reverse the course, because the forces that are now present in Europe are already just a shadow of what was there during the Cold War. And even though the security situation is not identical, Russia has been running a military buildup over the last 10 years and outnumbers NATO's troops, meaning both European and American, in the northeastern region or northern flank, about at least 5-1, if not more. So even though, for example, from Polish perspective, even though some of the forces from Germany will be probably rotated to Poland, it's a move that was criticized, or at least there was controversial here, because those American soldiers also show commitment of the U.S. and point to the interest that U.S. has in supporting European security. And I'm more than happy to go back to this, because I'm looking at this, that this is very European focused perspective. We should talk about also why this is, of course, of a great interest for the U.S. I also wanted to give you a quick overview of a poll that GMF has conducted over the last couple of months, where we asked an average person, right? This is a representative group of folks in France, Germany, and US. What are the key issues for transatlantic cooperation? And you will, I hopefully you can see it, despite relatively small font, how the priorities have moved from before to, well, it's really not after COVID. I mean, we are still very much during the pandemic, where climate change is actually, pretty high up beforehand, even for Americans, and of course, counterterrorism and security is high up, to health cooperation as one of the key opportunities for transatlantic cooperation. We also asked about the importance of NATO for the local populations, and you will see, very much strong support in France, in Germany, in the US, and this is very much the picture across Europe. In my part of the world, we don't have it in this poll, but in my part of the world, support for NATO is even stronger, and support for US leadership is stronger yet, comparing to some of the Western European allies. I'll show you that in a second. And there is, there we go, about US involvement in European security, as I mentioned. And the good news from European perspective is that there seem to be, despite the debate, there seemed to be a very solid 65% majority in the US, in the US population when it comes to the need for US involvement in Europe. Here is a slide that I wanted to give you sort of to differentiate between different countries in Europe, because we are, of course, very heterogeneous group. European Union and all the countries here are in the EU have different views of the US. Those that you see in the dark blue are the countries that are seeing, that are looking for the closest bonds with the US on security and really on issues beyond security. That is, it's certainly all of the Central and Eastern Europe, Spain, Sweden, and Finland. There are a few others that want to focus on security. And then the interesting dynamic is what we are seeing in those two big sort of purplish or pink countries, so France and Germany, that are looking for cooperation with the US under President-elect Biden and his administration, but are also looking for greater European capabilities, perhaps also European autonomy to act, even if US does not want to act in a security crisis, for example, in our neighborhood, and are prepared for US disengagement, eventual disengagement from Europe. One of the key topics in the transatlantic relations, also with the next administration, will be the approach to China. The debate in Europe is changing, and frankly, this is in a way a bit of an older view. It's moving closer to from a position that you are seeing here, of position of pragmatism, let's work on some issues and be and compete on others, with the exception of the Balkans and Romania and Greece, where they are seeing Bulgaria and Greece, they are seeing China more of a strategic partner. The debate in Europe is moving more and more in a direction of China as a strategic rival, especially when it comes to technology, to a good extent when it comes to economics. But China is also more and more present, not in our neighborhood, in southern Mediterranean and Eastern Mediterranean, and even in the Baltic, which is, as you see, is quite a difficult and a long way for China to go. And that slide probably shows you a little bit better the differentiations, where some countries like Poland have already begun introducing restrictions. And the test case is, of course, 5G and restrictions on Huawei. And while other countries are keeping very much an open, liberal trade exchange with China. The last slide I wanted to share with you is about another important issue in transatlantic relations that doesn't immediately have an impact on NATO, but politically is very important, and that's the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that would bring, we'll see whether it will be completed, gas from Russia to Germany. That bypasses all the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and it also bypasses Ukraine, that has been benefiting both financially from transfer of gas, but also had a level of political insurance in a way that Russia was reluctant to put more political pressure on Ukraine, given that Ukraine could stop transfer of gas, Russian gas, to Europe, and that pipeline is frankly dividing us in at NATO quite a bit. U.S. has imposed sanctions on companies that are completing Nord Stream 2 that slow down the program and the pipeline. And right now there is very much a question what would be the policy of the incoming Biden's administration. So I'm mentioning it here because these are the non-direct security issues, but that nonetheless have a very much strong impact on NATO's cohesion and on our alliance. Let me now try to figure out how to stop sharing. Oh, there we go, stop sharing. And perhaps pause here because that's sort of the main points I wanted to hit. But you know, for any more specific or general questions or comments from you, and I'm happy to go in any direction that you would like to take it.
Yeah, we'll start typically getting some questions rolling in. I've got a couple just from listening to your presentation. So towards the end, you were talking about China specifically. I guess I'm curious about the impact of the new RCEP alliances and how those countries are going to be viewed in the context of the already kind of mixed relationships with China, particularly like countries like South Korea, Japan, and Australia.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this is the new trade bloc is really potentially a game changer that we are worried about quite a bit. For NATO and for Transatlantic Alliance as a whole, China will be the key issue in the upcoming probably decades. It will be a mix of economic opportunities but also economic and technological threats and military tensions. So the key from Europe would be to, and I would argue from Washington, would be for, especially for the transatlantic partners, to approach China together. In order to do so, we need to have not only common view, but also common tools. And what we are now seeing with the trade agreement in Asia is consolidation, not yet super deep, but consolidation of partners around China. And in order to counter this, we need to think very strongly about greater trade and economic partnership across the Atlantic, but frankly also, which has been on the agenda for decades now, but has been unrealized. The last incarnation of this was Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP. But the second way to address it, that, you know, an opportunity that frankly I think has been lost, was that Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, TPP, that was counseled by Trump administration early on, and I worry that this window of opportunity is closing, and that China, giving its economic weight, is basically picking off our common allies. I mean, they are a little bit more your allies, American allies, the Australians, Japanese, and South Koreans. But frankly, we are on the same boat, of broader democratic West that is very much challenged now by autocratic China and actually autocratic Russia at the same time.
So did you say that the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, could potentially have worked to head off some of the regional comprehensive economic partnership impact now?
What it would be, I think we would live in a very different world had the TPP gone forward. It would be, you know, I'm not sure if it would stop it, but it would certainly put a counterweight what was to you know, what we are witnessing right now. I frankly don't know how quickly it could be revived and sort of rebuilt, but you know, it's not exactly Europeans' game. It's a little bit more American game there, but of course, for really everyone in democratic Europe, we would want US to be in a favorable position to compete with China, also in Asia.
All right, so we do have a couple of questions coming in through the Zoom chat now. Randy Noonan, member of the board, local professor, asks, what should the West do about Belarus? Can we help bring some sort of transition there? And that's the question.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thank you, Randall. And we are here just, you know, from Warsaw, we are just about 500 kilometers, 350 miles from Minsk. So this is very close, and lots of friends over there. So it feels like a very close situation. What the West can do? First of all, let me be a little bit blunt. I think right now, US is missing in action in Belarus. Europe is slow. Europe has taken a long time to impose sanctions on the regime following the crackdown in Minsk, but we finally have done this. US has slowly done it as well, but it's quite striking how slowly US administration is moving on this. You know, I give a great credit to Deputy Secretary Biegun, who visited Vilnius and met with leader of the Belarusian opposition, Tsikhanouskaya, and but it took a longer time. What can we do? One is, I mean, and as you all know, this is a very much it's something that flared up after the August so-called presidential election, but it's a ongoing crisis and conflict for the past 2 decades. I mean, I'll tell you what I think and what the Belarusians are telling us that they need. One is, don't recognize Lukashenko as legitimate leader. He's not. He stole the election. It's absolutely clear. Second, provide political support to the opposition that legitimately won the election. Don't forget about Belarus. Thirdly, and that's somewhere actually where Poland has played a positive role already on the EU stage, create for the West, for both Europe and the US, create an economic package as an incentive for transition. So basically offer a honeypot at the end of political transition that will provide more of pressure internally on the authorities. And fourthly, or maybe even firstly, in a way, make it very clear to Russia that an intervention open intervention in Belarus, military intervention in Belarus, would make the relations with Russia even worse than they are right now. Now, with all those tools, it's not going to be easy, because in the end, it will have to be Belarusians on the ground who bring the transition. Lukashenko keeps being extremely violent. You might have seen that over 1,000 people have been detained past weekend, but the Belarusian democratic opposition is now much broader. It's a movement, and they keep coming back. They are very resilient. So we just need to support them in this fight, which might take a while. And it might not, and it's certainly doesn't have to be into some kind of pro-Western democratic system. It might be another, but hopefully a little bit less bad guy, because there is a limit to, I think, to frankly what Russia would be able to accept, given that Belarus is really it's not only they see Belarus as part of their sphere of influence, but it's militarily makes Russia quite vulnerable if it becomes, at the end of the day, part of NATO.
So we do have some questions starting to come in now. So maybe just one quick follow-up before we move on. You had mentioned at the beginning of that answer that the U.S. was kind of missing in action in this. Is there any reason to think, or early indications that the new administration is going to be more involved or take a different approach?
Yeah, there are some positive signs. First of all, President-elect Biden has spoken about Belarus quite openly. Also, he has written an article to Foreign Affairs outlining what needs to happen in Belarus. Some of his key Europe advisors are focused on Belarus. So right now, we are seeing more of an interest and an involvement from the Biden's transition team than which is a good thing. So yeah, there is certainly expectation of future involvement.
Yeah, if we look at got some feedback there. Sorry. Bill asked about Russia. What do you expect to see, or do you expect to see a post-Putin Russia anytime soon? And what's the impact on Russia and NATO? So let's start with the first one. You expect to see post-Putin Russia anytime soon?
There is very little to indicate post-Putin Russia. There is some rumor about his health problems, but even if Putin was to go, there is basically nothing to indicate that the regime itself would change its nature. I mean, it's not just one person, but it's a systema. It's a system that mixes authoritarian rule with oligarchy and benefits state services and secret services the most. So that produces the kind of policies that we are seeing. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed and very much for Russian Democrats, but there isn't, there are no clear signs of weakening of the regime. Russia is going through a very tough pandemic, and it is facing big economic problems, and it's generally a declining power, but it's declining in a dangerous way, there is. It's fingers crossed, but don't expect that to come anytime soon.
Sure. So the second part of his question was about NATO and Russia, and I think maybe we'll just expand it a little bit. So to the extent that the Warsaw Pact was a response to Germany raising a military and wanting to join NATO, and then dissolved with the dissolution of the USSR, are there ongoing tensions or any artifacts from that relationship with those groups of countries, and then maybe Russia a little bit more specifically?
I'm not sure if I understand. Artifacts of what?
So the Warsaw Pact kind of dissolved with the Soviet Union, but are there any kind of remaining tensions or any dynamics of that relationship that are continuing today?
Between the post-Soviet space and Russia?
Correct. I'm sorry, between the post-Soviet space and the current NATO countries.
Oh, no, because it's, the 1990s brought full political transformation. So no, not at all. I mean, this is from the Baltic States through Poland, Visegrad, all the way to Romania and Bulgaria. All these countries are part of NATO. They are all part of EU. Sure, we have, some political tensions here and there, but not in any way that that brings that somehow Russia is an attractive player. Maybe with one exception, but it's also with different reasons for it. Hungary is a country that has pretty close energy relationship with Russia and pretty close economic relationship with China, while being member of the EU and of NATO. But it's not a post-Soviet guys. It's very much it's run by Viktor Orban, who was one of the anti-communist protesters and dissidents. But Hungary is just not feeling the same level of threat from Russia, so they decide to do business with Russia. Everyone else, basically, especially the Baltic states and Poland and Romania, feel very much threatened by Russia, and threatened because Russia keeps you have crossing of flyover in our airspace. You have military exercise, for example, that includes a nuclear strike on Warsaw. That's exercise in 2018 Zapad. You have great militarization of the Kaliningrad Oblast, which is the piece of Russia between Poland and Lithuania. It has more tanks than Germany and Belgium combined. So no, that's our lens through which we see Russia.
So with respect to the NATO members, are you saying that beyond contentious relationship, there's still a little bit of aggression coming from Russia towards those countries?
Quite a bit. No, it's really not a little bit. It's both political and military. I mean, and right now you have, I mean, the best example of flagrant aggression is of course Ukraine, where you have an ongoing war. Now Ukraine is not member of the alliance. We could not have that within NATO. We would be at war with Russia, but Russia is destabilizing all of its neighborhood, from Ukraine to Moldova to Georgia to Nagorno-Karabakh. You've been observing the conflict there, and it's turning some of the cold, frozen conflict into a hot conflict. So no, Russia is very much an aggressive power under Putin in very clear, military terms. I could fly over from Warsaw and within an hour and a half be in a hot war zone. I mean, this is how close we are.
That sets up, leads perfectly into Saul's question. Saul Ash, our president here at the World Affairs Council. Knowing that NATO is organized as a defensive alliance, are there any circumstances where you could conceive of an actual armed conflict between NATO and Russia, presumably that the U.S. would have to get involved in as a NATO partner?
Right. So this is an excellent question, and I would say this is a low probability, very high impact scenario. But this is something that keeps us up at night. And this is frankly what NATO has been preparing for since 2014. All the transformation I mentioned in first Wales, then Warsaw, then Brussels, is exactly in order to deter this kind of Russia-NATO conflict. Deterring by positioning enough forces to give Russia second thoughts about it and make it very clear that any aggression against one NATO member state will be met with a response of the alliance as a whole. The most vulnerable are the Baltic states. The length of the border between, or the corridor, so-called Suwałki corridor, between Poland and Lithuania, where on the left you have Russia and on the right you have Belarus with close security ties to Russia. So the length of the corridor where the Baltic states could be reinforced by land is only 60 kilometers. It's very easy to close it. So that's the scenarios that we are preparing for. Frankly, the nightmare scenario that is in our head, but it's not a crazy scenario. Don't get me wrong. This is something that Pentagon is thinking about, that NATO headquarters is thinking about. Is a scenario in which you have some trouble brewing in Asia, that focuses Washington's attention there, and perhaps even requires some forces to be pulled from Europe to Asia, and that gives an opening for a quick aggression in our part of the world that you then have to push back on from Russia. So it's a long way to say, yes, it's real. Russia is exercising this. I mean, they are actually exercising land grabs in northeastern Europe. I just, the alliance have been preparing for it, so to keep the probability manageable for right now.
So we've got some questions coming in more about the U.S.-European relationship, I think, but let's just stick with conflict kind of on that side of the world for one more question. Bill Litvin asks, as maybe kind of a follow-up, is there anything that could draw NATO members into Middle East conflict, French involvement in Lebanon, for example?
Well, NATO members for sure. NATO as a whole is of course present in Afghanistan, and I know it's been a long war for US, but it's been a long war for Europeans, allies of NATO allies as well. Frankly, there's more of us there at the moment than there is of Americans. It's a very complicated piece because of also big tensions within NATO, especially between Turkey and France, Turkey and Greece, Turkey and Germany and the US. So the really bad scenario that we are worried about as sort of the expert community is actually something hot going on between Turkey and Greece, where France would support Greece, Germany is trying to play a little bit more middle road. But that's I think where I see as more probable than Syria is an ongoing problem, but no one wants to touch it. Lebanon and others are much more. Libya is actually another place, but these are much more issues that have a bilateral importance for the French, sometimes for the Brits, for others, rather than for alliance as a whole. NATO will do a lot to stay away from the Middle East if it can be avoided.
So let's turn right. Look at some of the relationships between the NATO member countries. Bill Thomas, member of the board here, asked what specific. Oh, I'm sorry, member of the organization. What specific actions or policies do you feel need to be taken to improve U.S.-European relationships?
Sure. There's a lot to be done, and frankly, there is quite a bit of expectations in Europe vis-a-vis the incoming U.S. administration. One is a little bit more about language and sort of and the way we treat each other. I mean, Poland has had very good relationship with the US under President Trump, but France and Germany, especially Germany, have had pretty tough time, feeling being attacked at quite a few occasions. So first of all, there is hope that the rhetorics will change. But then when it comes to concrete policies, there are a couple, and we have actually, I should, if I find it, I'll put it in chat, but GMF has recently completed sort of a task force report outlining all the key areas where there could be a greater opportunity for cooperation, especially under Biden's administration. One is the key area will have to be how do we cooperate on China? We just have to come together to a more common views and policies toward China. Secondly, because it's of a key importance for you and for us, is cooperation on actually health and dealing with the pandemic, cooperation in producing and then dispersing the vaccine. The third one that is really big potential that we talked a little bit about, that has also geopolitical aspect of it, is trade. If we could finally overcome the problems in coming to something like the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, that would provide a great momentum for other aspects of cooperation. And I mentioned, actually, I forgot one that would be sort of the top, something that Biden already mentioned is cooperation on climate change, and that's and return of U.S. to the Paris Agreement. So these would be the main ones that I see as a potential that there is a desire for, and that in Europe, and that there are indications from the next administration that that there could be an opportunity for.
We look at like cooperation. Dave Carroll asks, member of the board, past president of the organization, is cyber security cooperation being shared within the within NATO, and maybe in particular in the context of us losing one of our most senior cybersecurity officials? What's the sense there?
Yeah, so I know it's not great. So cybersecurity. Cyber is now recognized as one of the domains. There is also a position and greater coordination within NATO on cybersecurity issues, but it's still, because of the nature of cyber war and cyber weapons, the capabilities are not widely shared within the alliance. So, and it's a little bit closed information held by various member states. The threats are shared much more than the weapons, but it is area that is moving very, very fast, both when it comes to building defensive capabilities and doctrine, and it's clear that that cyber attacks could have an Article 5 results, basically, or create result that would require Article 5 cooperation and involvement of others, where the next frontier, which is developing, and is to what extent can NATO develop and coordinate and cooperate on more offensive cybersecurity, both tools and doctrines, and that's something that is being developed, but certainly very high on the agenda.
And I have a couple follow-up questions here yet, but we still got a few minutes here for member questions. But kind of sticking in the vein of cooperation, or maybe not quite so much. For a while, we were hearing a lot about the 2% and whether everybody was contributing what they were supposed to be. So what's the current status? Are all the countries paying, not paying? Does it matter? Like, how do we look at this?
Yeah. Well, it's I think, and I can, since we are talking about this, let me just bring it back up with the exact slide, because there we are. The answer is yes, it matters. But okay, yes, it matters. It will matter differently under Biden's administration, but Americans have been making this excellent point for a while, including under Obama and earlier, that the burden sharing is insufficient between US and Europe. You will see in the right corner that there is quite a few countries, including the big ones, especially Germany, that are just not spending the 2%. The trend is definitely up. This is that's the difference between the blue and dark blue, but we are not there yet. What I very much expect similar pressure from Biden's administration, but using a different vocabulary, and probably also emphasizing a little bit more on the issue of what the money is spent on, because to be blunt, Greece, for example, is spending 2.58, but a huge chunk of it goes to its retirement for an infrastructure that is not directly militarily related. While others are spending, and here actually is Poland, is spending not only 2% on defense, but 20% for modernization of our armed forces. So the question here is, what do we actually do with the money? And are we spending it for the necessary modernization of the armed forces? But yes, this debate is not going to go away. But I don't think there is certainly hope that we will not see what we have seen, for example, in Brussels, where President of the United States was reading from a page from a paper, each country giving thumbs up or thumbs down, depending on whether they reached 2% goal or not.
Could possibly be a little more nuanced than that.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, are you good for a few more questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Sure. So another one from Randy in the member chat here. Could Poland's past close ties with Trump hurt relations with Biden?
Yes, but I don't think it's. I don't. You're entirely right that Poland had very close relationship with President Trump, and I sometimes joke that Poland was one of the countries that sort of put on the MAGA hat a little bit too much. I don't think that this is an issue, but there is one bigger issue. The bigger issue is that the Polish government, because of its close ties, or while being close with US, has and building up security and defense relationship, has basically made a couple step back when it comes to democratic norms. We have quite some issues when it comes to independence of judiciary. We have quite some issues when it comes to human rights and rights for LGBT community. There are some problems with freedom of the media. I think those are, and on all these issues, Trump administration was just not outspoken. It was just, they were not an issue in bilateral relationship. And right now there will be. And I think that's what can and will certainly impact the tone and warmth of relationship with Biden's administration. Perhaps not, the assessment here is at least that those will not be immediately linked with security and defense cooperation, but they will certainly be linked with the closeness of political relationship, and that's very likely to cool off with Biden.
So not really a question, but Saul observes that we've not yet discussed the nuclear umbrella. So I guess to some extent that probably buys us a lot of patience with other NATO countries, right? How does that dynamic come into play within NATO and then between the NATO relationships with other companies, countries?
So interestingly, this is actually quite a vibrant debate here. And the nuclear umbrella is in a sort of back there, but because the debate is about something that is called by the French European strategic autonomy. It's a bit of a misnomer, but it's an argument of to what extent Europe can provide its own capabilities to deal with security in Europe and its neighborhood. And President Macron is a great proponent of European strategic autonomy. And he's actually emphasizing that despite of an outcome in the US where because it'd be very clear if President Trump, this debate would be raging even more so. But Macron is making a case: hey, Europeans can't continue to rely on the US to the same degree, despite Biden's win. Germany is playing this middle road, and Germany is, of course, lacking its own nuclear umbrella. And the greatest, sort of the biggest voice in this debate is the German defense minister, AKK, who is saying, yes, Europe needs to step up, but we need to do it within NATO as a European pillar of NATO, frankly, because there is no prospect for European nuclear umbrella. The French will not share. The Germans don't want to develop it, at least right now. That debate is not real. So there is a really an ongoing, especially French-German debate, where Poles are a little bit, clearly in the camp of keeping the strong transatlantic ties, both at the nuclear level, but also at more conventional level. Right now, Europeans are lacking the capabilities to deal with the type of crisis scenario that we discussed. We just need the American reinforcements to have credible deterrence in our part of the world, both conventional and nuclear.
Excellent. All right. So a few minutes left if anybody wants to squeeze in a last chat question. I've got one more question, then we can move towards wrapping it up here. So I'm curious about the power of the organization to apply sanctions, right? Or so both within NATO and then countries outside of NATO, including kicking potentially a country out of NATO, is brought up from time to time, particularly in the context of Turkey, for example. So what non-violent deterrence does NATO as an organization have in those kinds of situations?
Well, so kicking out a country is we've never done this before. There is no precedent. There is no easy way out, and I think because of this, it ain't gonna happen. Now, Turkey is increasingly a difficult problem on a whole host of issues, including the purchase of S-400s from Russia. But the sanctions are basically political pressure, and it's not working very, very well if you have a country that is willing to withstand it. It's frankly a big headache that that is not easily solved. There is, especially, Turkey is of a particular importance here, and when I talk, we do have an office in Ankara, and when I talk with my colleague there, their view is that there is because the relationship between Trump and Erdogan was sort of close, and in a way was moderating the pressure from the U.S., rest of the U.S. establishment. That there is quite a bit of worry in Ankara that without Trump the pressure would be much greater. And perhaps that pressure will be enough to solve some of the issues we are seeing. But I don't have any good answer, and certainly it's a headache that my colleagues in Brussels are talking about a lot.
Excellent. All right, so let's wrap this up with something fun. What is your favorite part of your job? What do you love most about what you do?
Mm-hmm. This is a really fun job. And frankly, those kind of conversations are the most fun. I get to talk with a whole bunch of very interesting people, and Now it's a little bit trickier with the pandemic because we don't travel as much. So most of it is on Zoom, and that's a little bit different. But it's really very satisfying when you have some bright minds, preferably together in one room, sometimes with a glass of wine, sometimes just with a sandwich, and you mix thinkers with policymakers, and you actually see a policy change at the end of the process. It doesn't happen super often, but it happens often enough that it makes it rewarding. And and frankly, Warsaw is a very interesting place to be because these debates about security and defense are not theoretical. I mean, we have they feel here quite real. So it's perhaps not as rich as Washington, because Washington is in fact full of think tanks, and but it makes it makes for a very real and robust debate here with from time to time an impact in the real world.
Sure, and I definitely appreciate you taking the time to come meet with us today. I'm sure our members do as well, both the people who are live on the presentation and who are going to be able to watch the recordings on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you, Michael, for taking the time to talk to us here today. And I'm going to
thank you very much for the invitation.
Absolutely. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Saul for some closing comments here. You just need to unmute yourself, Saul.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you also, Michael, from my perspective. Very helpful. When you were speaking of taking a break with a glass of wine, I'm German, so I like a glass of beer. So that's my heritage. So also, we have a small gift for you to say thank you. I want to make sure that Dave Bean has your mailing address. It's a gift created by a local artist representing our local Pennsylvania German culture. So that's our small way to say thank you. We really appreciate it. You may be interested in knowing what we have coming up. December 9, we have on the general topic of climate change, John Dernbach speaking. Mr. Dernbach is the director of the Environmental and Sustainability Center and an internationally recognized authority on sustainability development, climate change, and environmental law. Then finishing this calendar year, December 16, Wednesday at noon, as is the December 9, Wednesday at noon on the 16th, James Olson, on a topic that we haven't, it'll be a very unusual topic for us. His topic is My Friend the Spy, the notorious case of FBI Special Agent Robert Hanssen, who is now spending the rest of his life in incarceration. During his FBI career, Mr. Olson was a close FBI colleague and friend of Mr. Hanssen, and he was arrested in 2001 and charged and convicted of committing espionage on behalf of the former Soviet Union. As I say, now spending the rest of his life without parole and incarceration. Good topic for us, something very different. January 13, as we open the new year, we have Nicholas Eftimiades, who's spoken to us before. His topic this time is international security. He's retired from the United States Department of Defense and now on the faculty at Penn State here in Harrisburg. Finally, we urge all people who are attending to visit our website, www.wacreading.org, wacreading.org, to learn more about upcoming programs, those I've just reviewed, and those already in place for 2021. And to learn about other ways the World Affairs Council of Reading benefits members, students, and the larger community. And this is our sales pitch. So if you've not yet become a member and you think you might be interested in doing that, we very much welcome you. We have different levels of membership. And again, you can access that information on our website. So thank you, everyone. And Mr. Baranowski, once again, thank you very much for being with us.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you for having me, and stay healthy, stay safe. See you on the other side of the Atlantic. Bye-bye.